Welcome to the Rivals Rankings podcast. My name's Adam Friedman, the Rivals rankings director on the East Coast. And that's Adam Gorney. He is the recruiting director out on the West Coast there. We just had this huge rankings release for the 2022 class, a brand new Rivals 250 and huge updates in the position rankings. I want to get right into it with you, Gorney. The huge move by Quinn Ewers to move to the 21 class opened up a big gaping spot at the top of the Rivals 250, and then we had some movement there with Cade Klubnik earning his 5th star, moving up there. What are your thoughts just on how the quarterback rankings played out in this newest update?
Yeah, we were, moving Quinn to 2021 meant that there was definitely a spot for another 5-star quarterback, but I think we were going to make Klubnik a 5-star regardless if Ewers stayed for his senior year or went to Ohio State. He was good at our event at the Rivals 5-Star Challenge in Atlanta, showed a lot of ability, arm talent, all that kind of stuff. He was even better when we saw him at the Elite 11 out here, just super consistent, very good. I still think he was probably a step off of what Quinn Ewers was, but he might be sort of one of those top quarterbacks that we talk about for a lot of years ahead. So Klubnik was definitely a guy who was on our radar for a rankings bump if he had a very good summer. He had a very good summer. We moved him up to the number 1 quarterback in the country.
Sure. I like what he brings to the table a lot more than what Walker Howard or Gunnar Stockton do. I love all of their junior film for sure. Another guy that moved up in a big way was Devin Brown after you guys saw him out at this offseason. What were your impressions of him, getting to see him really in that controlled environment finally?
Yeah, Devin Brown was probably the quarterback that surprised us most all summer long. Completely in that same class of quarterback as Klubnik, Walker Howard. Gunnar Stockton didn't do any national events, so we didn't see him, but we saw Walker Howard a good bit. But Devin Brown can fire it all over the field. He was a guy that, was very consistent during long stretches at the Elite 11, and a guy who has started his senior season with 8 touchdowns in his first game in Utah. So he's definitely a guy that's stock up, big time stock up for us. And I think he could even move higher with a good senior season and an all-star game.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot that he brings to the table that I really like as well. There were a few other guys that came in with some question marks, and we saw them move around a little bit. Taven Jackson, Gavin Wimsett. We saw Rocco Beck finally get updated up to 4-star status there and into the Rivals 250. And then Nick Evers also moving up there. Any thoughts on just some of these big movers that at the position?
Yeah, Taven Jackson was a guy that I really, really liked for long stretches at the Elite 11. He was inconsistent at times, but when he was good, he was very, very good. And his kind of play style, he's a smooth guy that can deliver it all over the field. He can move and run around a little bit. I think is going to be a perfect fit at Tennessee. I think Josh Heupel's going to really like what he has in Taven Jackson. And that's a guy that I think, with more seasoning and an offense that is super friendly for him, can really put up big numbers in Knoxville. Gavin Wimsett is a guy that looks great. I thought was a little high in our rankings, had moments that were very good at the Elite 11, but then was a little erratic, especially throwing across the middle a little high. So I think that was a guy that kind of has to be placed a little bit more. I want to get a better feel for him through this season and whenever we can see him again. Nick Evers is a guy going to Florida, and this is someone who we definitely liked and we moved up. But it's also a little bit of a situational thing. He is going to a quarterback friendly environment. Dan Mullen has done incredibly well with developing quarterbacks. And he's a guy that really takes to coaching, really understands what they want from him, and then has the skill set to do that. So I think those are the 3 guys that stand out the most there and what they did this summer.
Mm-hmm. 2 other guys I wanted to bring up, then I want to move on to the next position, was Connor Wegman and Ty Simpson. These 2 guys were on the cusp of 5-star status. They are still right there, just outside of 5-star status. We didn't necessarily see enough from them to move up to that next ranking there. What did you see out of those 2 this offseason that you maybe were hoping to see? I guess, what did you not see, I should say?
Yeah, honestly, Wegman at the opening of the Elite 11 was really not impressing me. He wasn't accurate. He was throwing low, skipping the ball a little bit, But as the event went on, and especially that first night in a big competition where he really had to throw every ball perfectly or he got sort of eliminated from the event, he really brought his A game. And I loved seeing that because it showed that he embraced competition in sort of a big moment or a created moment there, that he could really deliver the ball. And I think he has that mindset and that competitive edge that is really, really important to see. We saw this week that he's going to skip the MLB draft and he's going to Texas A&M. So obviously the arm talent is there, the competitiveness is there, the will to win. And on tape, he's fantastic and a big time playmaker, a little bit of a gunslinger. So Wegman is definitely a guy, as we continue through here, will be in that discussion for moving up even further. The second guy, Ty Simpson. I absolutely love Ty Simpson in terms of coach's son, gym rat, doesn't do anything wrong, all the things that you're looking for in a quarterback to run an offense. He's going to Alabama. He's obviously going to be coached well there and be surrounded with incredible talent at every position. And I think he's going to be able to maximize that ability. But when we saw him, he didn't exactly blow us away in terms of like delivering the ball and saying, this is absolutely a 5-star quarterback. We think he's a very talented kid, someone who's going to a situation that fits him perfectly and is someone that definitely can develop through his senior year and into an all-star event. We just didn't want to pull the trigger yet on 5-star.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I was hoping to see a little bit more out of the two of them when I saw both of them this offseason on film and in person for Ty Simpson there. I'm always impressed when I see Malik Murphy. He's a huge guy with a lot of talent. Just still needs to put it together on the field there for another move up if possible later this year. I want to move on to the running back position. We added another 5-star there in Raleek Brown, somebody you know very well. Tell me a little bit about what helped move him up to that 5-star status.
Yeah, the thing with Raleek Brown, and it's probably my fault, is that, I still just see him as undersized. I still just see him as like this little guy coming out of the backfield who's a scat back kind of type. But he really is developing physically. He's never going to be Najee Harris. He's never going to be Derrick Henry. But what he can do are very similar things. He can run between the tackles, and you can't tackle him in a phone booth. He just is so slippery. His feet keep moving. For a guy that small, he's very difficult to bring down. He has incredible balance, and that's just running the ball in between the tackles. Then he can get outside and run by people. He puts his foot in the ground, and people look like they're stuck in the mud. He's just a guy who, is super. He's like dynamic in a way where he's not just fast, but he just has that shake ability that he can juke anybody out of their shoes at any time. And that is just his running back ability. Then he can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can be a mismatch for linebackers trying to track him down the field. He can line up in the slot and catch passes. That's really what he wanted to do at Mater Dei last year. They didn't really have him doing it that much, but I think we're going to see that in his senior year. And that's what he's planning to do at Oklahoma. When he goes to Oklahoma, they said he's going to start in the wide receiver room because they want to involve him in the passing game from day one. He's that kind of athlete. And so I was talking to Woody Womack this year at the Elite 11, and I said, what do you think of him? And he said, I think he's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And so he's not exactly like the bowling ball bounce off people type that Edwards-Helaire was at LSU and now is in the NFL, but he's very similar in the sense that he could be used all over the field. And that height is almost a good thing because people can't jam him, can't get on him, and can't keep up with him down the field. And that's why we wanted to move him to 5-star. It's a little bit of a shot there we took on him, and we'll see if it plays out. But he is an incredibly talented offensive playmaker that we've loved for years.
Yeah, and I love what we see on film from him. Just sky's the limit on his potential. I don't think he's going to do enough to move ahead of Branson Robinson. I love that back, the one that's going to Georgia. He's a phenomenal back. And like you said earlier, a Nick Chubb clone for him. There's some other running backs here I wanted to get into. After you get past some of those guys at the top, like Robinson, Trevante Citizen, Gavin Sawchuk, you move into the Javante Barnes, George Pettaway, Le'Veon Moss, Jamarian Miller, Nicholas Singleton, Omarion Hampton. This is a really deep position, and there's got to be some guys here that you think could end up moving up the charts here with a big senior season and then potentially a big all-star game performance. Anybody that really jumps out to you there?
Yeah, it is a deep group. I don't know if they're like other 5-stars in the group, but there are definitely a lot of talented people that can do a lot of things. And so I love Javonte Barnes. They're all a little bit different. The guy that I really want to see more of is Jamarian Miller. He's already moving up. He's taken a big jump in the rankings, but I think he could go even further. He's very, very fast and dynamic on film. I think Steve Sarkisian at Texas went after him very, very hard and got him. He and Le'Veon Moss are the two that are really, really interesting to me. If Trevante Citizen and Le'Veon Moss both end up in that LSU backfield, that's going to be very, very interesting to see how that all shapes out. And then I think the other thing that I think is going to be interesting to see is Amarian Hampton and George Pettaway both going to North Carolina. There's almost like a duo thing going on. And then Nick Singleton and Katron Allen going to Penn State together. I think that could be a little bit of an interesting situation too. So there is definitely, we don't want to go nuts on 5-star running backs. That has to do with not only college performance, but how many carries they're going to get during college, but also NFL draft projection. They're not going to take a lot of running backs in the first round. There's not a lot of value there for the NFL teams. And part of our rankings is that projection. And so we like a lot of these guys high in the 4 stars, but we don't want to go too crazy on 5-star running backs.
I'm with you 100% there. I'm thinking about the order of these guys. I don't see many of them moving way up into the Rivals 100, maybe just outside the top 75, but there's a lot of really, really impressive playmakers here. I think George Pettaway could surprise some in a bigger environment when we get to All-Star season. I'm thinking the same thing with Nicholas Singleton. I'm interested to see how the increased competition tests him and how he's able to perform there. And then Amarian Hampton, early film from this season indicates he's all the way back from that ankle injury, and it'll be fun to watch him get back to normal for this coming season. He puts up huge numbers there in North Carolina. And then as we move further down the list, there's some interesting commitments out here too. Still in the Rivals 250, Ollie Gordon, Travaris Jones, Katron Allen, you mentioned him earlier. Justin Williams, I think, is a really good fit up there at West Virginia. Josiah Patterson just announced his commitment the other night. There've got to be some guys at this position you think are a really great fit in the system they're headed to. Which ones highlight that list for you?
Yeah, 2 for me would be Justin Williams, jacked up, muscled up kid who could move. I like him a lot. I thought he was really kind of under recruited. And I think that's going to be a steal for West Virginia. And then Jazz Patterson going to Iowa, another kid who early on was saying Penn State, Auburn, and then was saying Arkansas, and then Iowa gets involved, and obviously they know how to deal with running backs, and he's a guy that they can also use kind of splitting out and in different ways, and he's going to be running behind just a massive offensive line. So I think those are the 2 guys that at the running back spot certainly stand out a whole lot to me.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the receiver position. This is always a fun debate. There's some really good ones out there this year. I love the top of this position right now. Some really, really impressive guys here. Luther Burden, Evan Stewart moving up to get his 5th star after an awesome offseason. Kevin Coleman, T-Mac out there who just committed to Oregon. What are your thoughts on these 5-star guys and the guys that could end up moving into this range with big seasons?
Yeah, I actually think it's a position that there's a lot of they have to prove it during their senior years. Luther Burden, there are mixed reviews. I think he's very, very talented and a big physical receiver that can definitely dominate in a lot of ways. I thought the reviews out of Future 50 were very, very good. I do worry about his top end speed and his separation, and so we'll see how that works through the thing. What I don't want is another Laquan Treadwell type who's very dominant at the high school level, who looks great and then can't run away from people. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to see from Luther Burden. It's going to be interesting to see if he goes to Missouri or Georgia and how that all plays out. Kevin Coleman is another one I liked very much when I saw him in a 7-on-7 in Arizona. Very dynamic and fast kid. But I'm not crazy about the Jalen Waddle comparisons. Waddle was a little more physical, I think, probably a step or 2 faster. So just because he's an undersized, fast receiver doesn't make him Jalen Waddle. So I think those 2 guys really, really have to prove it. Evan Stewart had a very good showing at the Florida Friday Night Lights camp. He's obviously a fast kid with great separation ability and a route running guy. But again, I do want to see him against national level competition for an entire week at an all-star game. to see what he can do. You know, T-Mac is a guy who's a crazy athlete, super long, can get open, kind of like a volleyball player on a football field. And so that'll be interesting to see if he could emerge even higher in terms of where his ranking is.
Yeah.
He's never going to be a muscled up physical kid. So I think there are definitely talented receivers in this class. I think there are some that are even ranked lower that can move higher. But there is a little bit of a show me kind of thing going through their senior years into the All-Star games.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There was a couple of guys that I wanted to touch on that have the potential to move way up this list with big seasons and then big All-Star seasons. Andre Green is somebody who's continued to move up the rankings. Big receiver out of the Richmond area in Virginia. Really bouncy, great ball skills, has really great explosiveness out of his cuts. I'm a huge fan of his. I saw C.J. Williams earlier this year at the Los Angeles Rivals camp. I know, Gorney, you've seen him a million times. I'm a little bit higher on his potential than some other ones out there. I think he could still be in that top 35 or so. And then Barry Brown moved up. Caleb Burton's is still a really impressive player. We saw Caden Saunders have an awesome offseason. He moved up again here. And there's a couple other ones on this list, but I think that kind of sums up my potential mover uppers, I should say. Gorney, anybody else that stand out to you about guys who could end up moving up this list?
Yeah, I love CJ Williams. I always have. He's going to be a guy that I think fits very, very well at Notre Dame. I think that's a perfect situation for him. The guy that I'm really watching and definitely loved Caden Saunders in the summer. I think he had KJ Hamler comparisons, which I'm not really actually crazy about. I think he's taller. I think that's going to be a big thing. Plus, he can get open against anybody and still has that speed. But the guy I'm really watching is Barry Brown. I hope he shows up somewhere where we can see him on a national level, because I think that's a kid kind of hiding in Nashville a little bit, who could really emerge as one of the most talented receivers in this class. And so I want to see him against elite cornerbacks all week, and then see what we want to do with him, because I think that's a kid who's probably a little bit undervalued right now.
Cool. Okay, let's move to the defensive side of the ball here. We've got a couple of topics to touch on. The defensive line this year is really, really great. We've got 3 of them in the top 10, 4 in the top 15. Walter Nolen and Travis Shaw are really going to dominate the debate here at the top. I'm a Travis Shaw guy for sure. I know, Gorney, you leaned a little bit towards Nolen there. Just quickly, what are your thoughts on the 2 of them and what separates them right now?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, very little separates them. They're very similar players. I think Shaw's probably a little more physically dominant up the middle. He's just a little bigger, where Nolen's a little bit more athletically dominant up the middle. I think both of them are phenomenal players. I like both of them. We can't go wrong with either one of them. I think both are going to be very, very dominant college football players and going into the NFL. So I think that's a debate that we've had, and it's just really sort of a semantics debate. Or is 1, 2, 3? Is 1, 3, 2? In the end, it probably won't matter all that much. I think they're both just incredibly talented players with very few concerns on the field from either of their games.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to highlight quickly a couple of the defensive linemen that I think have not hit their ceiling in the rankings just yet. A couple of them off the top of my head here: Quincy Wiggins, Jaheim Oates, Marvin Jones, Kenyatta Jackson. Anybody else that kind of fits that description for you?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you look at a guy like Quincy Wiggins, who was at our 5-star challenge, looked like $1 million, lost a few more reps than I thought he was going to lose, but he still sort of doesn't really know what he's doing at the position. I think 3-4 years down the line, he's going to be a dominant football player. Jaheim Oates is maybe the biggest player in the entire class, in the entire country. If he can keep his weight under control, I think he could be a completely dominant force, like many others have been up the middle for Alabama. At that position, Amari Abor is a guy who I think could really emerge in his senior year. Marvin Jones is a kid who I think probably we have a little undervalued, and I want to see him this year. I think it's going to be important. This weekend, his team plays in a scrimmage IMG, so we'll get some tape from that, and we'll have people on the ground there at the game to see him. Shamar Stewart is a kid who I think has 5-star potential. During the offseason, he kind of, doesn't go through all of the reps and all of the camps and does that thing, which is perfectly fine. We just want to see him in games and in all-star settings if he could be dominant. So I think it's really a position that there's a lot of potential for guys to move up, but then also still a lot of questions on a lot of those guys to see exactly where they should kind of shape out into this class.
Cool. Okay, and I got a couple of more for you real quick. Jahad Campbell's somebody who I think could be a big riser after this season. A lot is expected of him this year. Plus, I'm a big fan of Ken Talley. I don't think that we've got him rated high enough here as an edge rusher, the one out of Philadelphia there. And there's a few other ones we could highlight here, but it's a really deep position. They've got a lot of big-time players all across the defensive line who are going to play for many, many years. I do want to get into the outside linebackers here. There's a big debate here at the top of the position. I sided with Jaylen Sneed as possibly being a 5-star. I got outvoted there, but CJ Hicks, there was no question about him staking at number 1. What was your preferred order for these outside linebackers?
Yeah, I mean, if it was just based off of summer performance, Jaylen Sneed, I think, was the best one of them all. He just has this weird knack of intercepting every pass that comes his way. He's always around the football and he turns his head at the last second and he's just always right there. So for an outside linebacker to be able to run like that, then to have ball skills like that, that is super, super special. But CJ Hicks does very little wrong. I mean, he just doesn't do anything wrong. He's long, he can cover, he's physical on tape, he can do everything that you want him to do. The question on Gabe Powers was always, was he just too big to play outside linebacker? Would he have to move to defensive end, which would have been perfectly fine too, but he proved this summer that he can move as well at that size, which is really, really impressive. So I'm not against this, how we have it now, which is Hicks, Powers, Sneed, Perkins. So I don't think I have a problem with that now, but it is certainly up to debate and to be determined if it's going to end up like that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. In the next tier here of outside linebackers, I see a lot of big names, guys who have a lot of potential to possibly move up the list here. I've been a huge fan of David Bailey. I know you've been talking him up for a long time. I'm a big fan of his. A few other ones, Deshaun Barham, Eni White, Sebastian Cheeks. There's a few other ones here who we really like a lot. There were a few names that stuck out to you, Gorney. I know you talked a lot about somebody like Anto Sanka during the call. Anybody else that really jumps out to you in this position?
Yeah, I love Saka on film. I mean, he's so long. He's such kind of an edge rusher type. And I think in that Northwestern defense, he's going to be able to shine a whole lot. And, the guy that we've talked about a lot too is David Bailey. He's kind of disappeared a little bit in the offseason. He'll be back for modern day. We'll see him a whole lot during his senior year. But another guy that when he puts the pads on, man, is he good? I mean, he's off the edge. He's in coverage. He's wrapping up. He's hitting people. He's tackling all over the field. He just kind of gets lost in this conversation a little bit because we see all these other guys at workouts or camps or events, and you're sort of like, oh, yeah, David Bailey's still sitting out there, and he's so, so good. So I think those are two guys that we're interested in seeing. Deshaun Barham is another one that I would love to see in person. And so I think there's some guys in this group who haven't been really out on the scene in the summer. And so we're really looking forward to seeing them during the season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And over at defensive back, we've got some cornerbacks that are really outstanding, just out of the 5-star range, starting with Jaden Lucas, Terrence Brooks, Julio Humphrey, Gentry Williams, Kamari Rogers. There's a lot of big-time players here at just outside of that 5-star range. At the top of the list, it's Shaheem Singletary, Denver Harris, Damani Jackson, and Will Johnson. Gorney, what were your biggest takeaways from the cornerback discussions this year after this impressive offseason?
Yeah, it's hard. I like Singletary at number 1. I think his length and his competitiveness really sets him apart. But, Damani Jackson running 10.25 in the 100 meters, guarantees him a lot of attention moving forward. And so if it was just up to me, I probably would have had him at number 2, Harris at 3, coming off that knee injury, Will Johnson at 4, that big cornerback who can do a whole lot of things. But I do think that there's definitely room for changes here. Terrence Brooks, I think, is incredibly talented. Jaden Lucas, I thought, was surprisingly more athletic than he sort of let on at the 5-star challenge. I think Earl Little is a guy that I want to see a lot more of. I think against IMG this weekend, he's going to be tested and we'll see how he does. Dalen Everett's a guy that I definitely like a whole lot. Bobby Taylor was very, very impressive at the opening, and I think has the potential to move up even more. And so as you go down into the 20s here, you're getting some very talented football players that some of them are undersized, which seems to be fine for the NFL. No one seems to really be worried about those 5'11" guys. But then you have a lot of guys with sort of that Eli Ricks length, maybe not as good, but a guy like Ephesians Prysock is super long. Marquise Groves Killebrew this summer, I thought was very impressive at our event. And so I think there's like a diversity of what the cornerbacks look like in this class, but through the 20s or so, they're all very, very good football players.
I agree with you. I agree with you too. I got a few guys who I think are maybe a little too low here in the rankings for you. I'm a big fan of what Dalen Everett can do. I'm a big fan of Bobby Taylor as well. And I think Dayon Bowie could be a little bit higher. This guy just screams football player. He's a guy who can make a lot of plays all over the field. And I'm excited to see what he's able to do this fall and into the All-Star season. Too high in this position, or maybe guys, I should say, I'm keeping an eye on this fall before I make any final judgments on them. LT Welch, Traquan Fegans, Travell Mullen, I think maybe could be a little bit higher, but I'm also trying to keep a close eye on a few other ones too. But I want to leave it there with the defensive backs. I thank you very much for tuning in to the Rivals Rankings podcast. I'm Adam Friedman. That's Adam Gorney. Make sure you follow us on Twitter and keep an eye on rivals.com for all of the other major news with this 2022 rankings release.